So I was reading a story in preparing for this message this week, and this single mom wrote, and she said this. She wrote into one of those advice columnists, and she said, "I'm drowning in debt. I see no light at the end of the tunnel, and it's causing me daily stress and anxiety." She said, "I am so worried about my future and worried about not being able to make my payments, and I'm worried about my kids." And then she told the story of what had happened. She was a single mother with 3 children. She got divorced 6 years earlier. And then she started making a series of poor decisions financially. She had a paid-off van that she was driving with her and her 3 children around, but she didn't really like the image of being, just a single mom in a van, and so she decided to trade in her van for a really cool Jeep. And so she made that trade-off, and now she had a really cool Jeep, but she had a car payment on the Jeep because she couldn't afford it. And then she started doing other things, newer clothes, updating her wardrobe, just on and on with all the little nickels and dimes. And before she knew it, 6 years later, she had $35,000 in credit card debt, not counting the debt from her vehicle. She said, "I'm trying to make a difference." She said, "I'm trying to pay it off." She said, "I don't see any way to pay this off." And she asked a question at the end of the advice letter that she'd written in. She said, "Can I get back on my feet, or am I just doomed?" She's not alone right now in our country wondering about that question, about finances. Can I get back on my feet, or am I just doomed? We've heard a lot as a nation recently about the debt ceiling, the debt ceiling, the debt ceiling, the debt ceiling, right? All heard lots and lots and lots of stuff about the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is affecting the federal government. They're talking about how it's going to impact, all of us if this debt ceiling doesn't get moved. But the reality is there's another debt ceiling going on, and there's another debt crisis in America, and it doesn't have to do with the federal government. It has to do with individuals and families across the country whose lives are being really, really impacted, like hers was, by debt. It's not just the federal government that has an issue with debt, it's individuals and families in America. Matter of fact, not so pleasant statistics as we get started today. Total credit card debt recently passed $986 billion. Almost to $1 trillion of credit card debt. We'll pass that shortly. Many of you know, did you remember hearing this? During COVID, you know what happened when we weren't out on vacations and we weren't spending stuff? That number went down. Credit cards debt went down. People were paying off their credit cards. And then the moment we were mobile again, the moment we weren't locked in our house again, it's like, woohoo, vacations for all. And out comes a credit card. Let's go out to shopping. Let's go buy some more stuff. We haven't been out to eat. Let's go out to eat every night. Woohoo, off we go. And so the credit card debt just skyrocketed back up, and it's about to break $1 trillion. USA Today had this article recently. It said U.S. credit card debt hit a record high as inflation leaves consumers financially stressed. So there's the other side of it is there are a lot of people who, isn't it crazy when you go to the grocery store how expensive everything still is? It's just still expensive. And you notice on everything you buy. Go buy butter, go buy eggs, go buy anything. Cereal. Everything is so much more expensive. And so a lot of families that were just barely making it before inflation went crazy are now not making it. And so they're using credit cards just to pay the basics, just to pay their basic expenses. And that's what the article was all about. It's a huge issue. The average, there are something like 25%, somewhere in that number, of Americans couldn't handle a $400 emergency expense. Right? There are 2 things that never tell you they're coming in life. 2 things. Emergencies and opportunities. They never tell you they're coming. And some of you this next week, you're going to have an emergency. And a huge percentage of Americans, when that emergency happens, they will not be able to cover it. A huge percentage of Americans couldn't handle a $400 emergency. Well, how many of you have had car repairs that cost more than $400? Right? Or medical bills, more than $400. Or a dental bill that costs more than $400, right? This is the reality of the world that we live in. Matter of fact, this phrase is being searched for more now than at any time in the history of our tracking. How do I pay off my credit card debt? People are afraid. They're scared. And the impact on our nation is pretty toxic. Do you know that money fights are the #1 cause of divorce? It's always been that way. And now all of a sudden, people are more upside down than ever before. If I ask you to consider just yourself and your personal situation, do you have any financial concerns right now? Are there things that you're worried about financially, either when you think about where you're at today or when you think into the future? So I thought, I wasn't planning to do a series on this year, but I thought in light of everything that's happening, I thought it was really important to stop and talk about money and money matters, because the Bible has thousands of verses about money. And so we're going to start a series we're going to talk about called Keeping Up with the Joneses. And we're going to talk about what the Bible has to say about money. And we're going to start with this one. How do I deal with my debt? How do I deal with debt? I want to ask you to open up your program. And inside you'll find these notes. Would you grab your notes, grab a pen, something to write with? This is really important. Welcome, of course, those of you who've decided to tune in online today. We're so glad you're watching. If you go to our website at pennielchurchlife.com, you can find these notes and download them as well. So, and if you know me at all, when you look at the notes, we're going to start with point number 2, of course. We're skipping point number 1 for time's sake. So point number 2, learn to hate debt. If you really want to deal with debt, the very first thing I'd say to you is you have to learn to hate it. Learn to hate debt. And isn't it obvious? We don't hate debt in America. We do not hate it. Americans do not hate debt. Matter of fact, I came across an article and they were talking about, I didn't call this, okay? I'm just quoting you what the article was titled, Dumb Things People Finance. Okay, I didn't write the title. I'm not calling anyone dumb. But dumb things people finance. Here's some of the things on the list. A cat. They couldn't afford a cat, so they put it on their credit card. Really had to have a cat. They paid for a litter robot for their cat. So then you have to have something for the cat. I didn't even know they made litter robots. You ever heard of that? I've never heard of that. A litter robot for your cat. So they couldn't afford the cats and they couldn't afford that, so they bought both of them. Somebody told about, I didn't even know you could do this, custom carpeting for their car. And they paid through the nose to have custom carpeting installed in their car. And I'm like, do you sleep on the floor of your car? Why do you care what's under your feet in your car? I mean, maybe the mat's okay, but custom carpeting? I didn't understand that at all, but somebody couldn't afford it, so they put it on their credit card. It's a painful one. Encyclopedia set, back when we used to buy these things. Some of you have painful memories of this. I do. Let's just move on. That's too ugly. All right. Timeshare. Do you know how many Americans are in debt because they're like, hey, you get a free weekend at so-and-so. And you're like, I'm not going to buy. And what happens? You get in front of that salesperson and you buy. And you're stuck with a timeshare. And you can't afford it, so you just finance the whole thing. For the low, low price of... one of the most amazing things was... somebody spent $4,000, this isn't a picture obviously of it, $4,000 on pots and pans. I'm like, in all of my life, every single pot or pan I've ever bought wouldn't even come close to adding up to that. I'm like, do they cook the food for me? It's like, hey, pot, make me some soup, and it makes it for me? $4,000. Now, some of you more experienced with this are probably like, Brian, you're so naive about this. I'm like, I am. Because I just buy cheap pots and pans, $4,000. And then one of my favorite stories is one young college student financed a high-end hunting rifle out of his student loans. If somebody were to calculate how much he will have paid for that rifle by the time he's done paying off his loans, he will be a little bit surprised, won't he? I mean, I could go on and on, right? You all get it. We don't hate debt in America. We don't hate that. We kind of like it. It's kind of fun. It lets us get things now. We don't have to wait for anything. Matter of fact, there are a couple of myths that we believe about debt in America that we have to actually go after if we're ever going to make any progress with this. The first myth is this. It's the idea that debt is no big deal. It's no big deal to have debt. This is what the average American thinks. It's why we will finance a cat. So I will finance carpeting for a car. It's why we will finance that brand new set of golf clubs that we want so bad. That's going to make us so much better if we just buy them, right? So we will constantly keep financing and financing and finance. Charge it. Because we believe that debt is really no big deal, but the reality is quite the opposite. Here's the reality. Debt is dangerous and can cost you everything. That's the reality. Debt is dangerous. And it can cost you everything. Now, before we go any further, I have to call a little time out here and just address something that comes up all the time in churches. There are pastors who will stand up in front of their churches and tell their congregations that it is a sin to have any debt. It's a sin. Maybe some of you have heard that. It's like, if you go into debt, you are sinning against God. Just so you know, I don't believe that, and the Bible does not teach that. And we know that emphatically because in the Old Testament, God said to the nation of Israel, he said, if you will follow my ways, I will bless you financially so much that you will never go into debt, but you will loan to the nations around you. Okay? If it was a sin, God wouldn't be saying to the nation of Israel, I won't make you sin by going into debt, but I'm going to make all the nations around you sin by going into debt. Right? You get it? He would never say that. It's not a sin, so we can just kind of strike that off, get it off of our plate. But it is incredibly unwise and very, very dangerous. And the reality is a lot of families are getting hurt right now. A lot of individuals are being hurt right now because they haven't taken it as seriously as they should. MSNBC recently had an article in which they outlined some of the things that they're seeing as more and more Americans, almost $1 trillion in debt on credit cards alone. That's not car payments. Do you know how much the average car payment in 2022 was for a new car? $700 a month. $700 a month. One of my mortgages earlier in my life didn't even cost me $700 a month. And you don't live in your car. It's the reality, and you know how many people are just signing up for that? And in many cases, they have more than one new car. But they also have emotional stress. Did you hear the words that single mom said as she was talking about her situation? It's causing me daily stress and anxiety. For some of you, this is what's going on inside of you emotionally. Conflict in relationships, I've already touched on that. Endangers your financial future. I'm going to give you a story in just a minute that's it's just an amazing story. True story about a family that their future is really in trouble. But this is the big one. It really limits your ability to earn wealth because people don't understand how money works. And so they take out all of these payments. They have all of these debts. And they're giving all of that interest money every single month to this bank or this lender or this lender or this lender. And so they don't have any ability to save any money, save nothing for retirement. I didn't even grab that stat. How many Americans have nothing saved for retirement? It's like we can't. Because all of our interest money goes to this lender and this lender and this lender and this lender. We don't get to use that. They use it. So it's just the reality of what's going on in our world. So again, it's not just Christians talking about this. People are talking about this. Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower, and look at that, is the slave. The borrower is the slave. God says it's like we're voluntarily putting ourselves into slavery when we take on debt. I read about this one young couple, that typical American couple, they had to have 2 new cars. Unfortunately, they couldn't afford 2 new cars. And something came up, and all of a sudden they couldn't afford the payment on one of them, and they tried to make ends meet. They couldn't, and the car was repossessed. Have you heard all the stats lately about cars being repossessed? Cars and homes. Like nothing we've seen. And so he lost his car. He said together he and his wife make about $60,000 a year. The rent is $1,000 a month. He has child support payments from a previous relationship. He has a $420 car payment on a car he doesn't own anymore. And he's still $22,000 in debt to family members. You ever been in debt to a family member? Wow. I mean, this couple is in trouble. Why? Because debt's not a big deal. Debt's no problem. And it's a myth. Debt is dangerous, and it can really cost you everything. That's the reality. Debt's dangerous, and it can cost you everything. So the question I have for you is, when you think about debt, how do you think about it? What's your attitude toward debt? No big deal? Just a nice tool to get what you want now? The other myth that we buy in America today, and I hear this all the time, it's just something you have to have. You just have to have debt. You have to be in debt. There's just no way around that. You have to have debt. And a lot of Americans just believe that's why we embrace it so willingly. You'll always be in debt. You'll always have to have debt, especially consumer debt, not be on a mortgage. You'll always have to have it. But the reality is this. The reality is, and I know this firsthand because I've seen it for so many years, many families enjoy the freedom of debt-free living. Many families enjoy this freedom of debt-free living. So it's not a message you're ever going to hear on a commercial because they want you to buy what they're selling. But the reality is, even in America today, there are a lot of people who don't live with debt. So I learned this in 2007. You're going to hear a little bit more of my story in just a minute. 2007, I was sent a kit like this from Dave Ramsey and this organization, Financial Peace University. It's this group you can go through, and you can have this in your church. And I literally thought, hey, that's no big deal. I'm really good at this. But I said, let's pilot this. And so I got some families together in the church at the time. There were 4 of us. We went through this course, and I thought, no problem. I'm going to just sail through this because I am so financially savvy. Yeah, we were overwhelmed by what we learned. We were not financially savvy, none of us. We'll get into more of this in a minute, but we were just so stunned by what we learned, and it changed our lives so much that we started telling everybody we could about it. Since I took that course the first time in 2007, I have easily watched over 200 individuals or families go through this course. Because I won't stop talking about it because it helped me so much. And when families go through this and they just begin to make some of the changes that he talks about, their whole life begins to change. And then they tell me about it. One family went through it, and they wrote me afterwards, and a while afterwards, they said, here's where we're at now. We've paid off one of our vehicles. We sold our expensive truck, and we bought a good used truck. We have no more car payment on that one either. Then we saved up money to put in new kitchen, bathroom flooring, and living room carpeting. Did you hear that phrase? They saved up before they bought it. Isn't that amazing? So before you buy it, you save for it. And they did that. And they did it right. Then they wrote, and this was great, we paid for our daughter's wedding completely in cash. And they wrote exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Because if you've ever tried to pay for a wedding recently, ow, I have 7 daughters. Just let that number hang there for a minute. 7 daughters. I paid for 2 daughters' weddings last year. There are 2 more on the horizon. So it's like, whoo. If I wouldn't live this way, I'd be in big trouble, right? They said, we have an emergency fund and our savings is growing. We're knocking off all our little debts one by one. We have been successful in not incurring any more debt. And so not only have we been able to plug the holes in our finances, we're really experiencing financial freedom. I'll tell you, when you get to that point, and again, this happened for me in 2007. It took 2 years for me to climb out of the hole we were in, 2 years to fill that hole back in. And when you pay your last debt, the freedom that you have is amazing. The freedom you have is amazing. As someone who was in debt and got out of debt, you can learn this. It's not what the world tells you. And the world will tell you, no, it's just inevitable. You're always going to have debt and you're always going to be in debt. And that's not true. There are ways out. I'm not saying it's easy. Many of you know that, right? Many of you have taken that course and you're like, Brian's making it sound easier than it is. I'm not trying to make it sound easier. I'm just saying it's worth it. But I'll tell you this, in the first 4 years after that, I taught that course, probably the first 6 years, I taught it at least 4 times. So that meant every time we started a new group, I gathered a whole new group of people around me and we went through it. So I've probably been through the course 4 times with probably 30 to 40 couples or individuals. And I've seen both. I've seen amazing results where people's lives were changed and they became debt-free and they totally turned their financial future around. And I've also been sitting in my living room and watched people change nothing and come out of the course and there was no difference, none at all. And so I began to wonder, what's the difference? Why does this group make it and this group doesn't? And it all comes down to this issue of desire. The group that makes it learns to hate debt. They hate it. When you hate something, do you want more of it? I hate lima beans. Hate them. Hate them with all that I am. Do you think I want more lima beans? No. And now that I'm an adult and not a child and don't have to eat what is put in front of me, I will never again eat lima beans because I hate them, right? And only the people who get to the point where they hate debt get free from debt. The ones that are like, oh, this all makes sense to me, but I kind of want another car, or I kind of want a boat, or I don't want to wait to save up money to remodel my kitchen. I got a credit card, and I'm just going to do that now. So I can have a new kitchen, new bathroom, okay, great. The ones who hate it, make it. The ones who don't hate it, don't make it. And that's your choice. You make the decision. You're going to hate it? Well, if you hate it and really hate it, you'll fight it. That's when we get to the point and just embrace the American mindset that it's okay, it's always going to be there, that we really start to struggle. So again, what's your attitude toward it? Now, once you really get to the point where you realize what it is, it's slavery according to the Bible. Voluntary slavery. And you start hating being enslaved, then you can do something about it. You can start making changes today. This is what I want you to know. You can make changes today. Start making changes today. So here's what I want you to know. If you ever heard of something called the first rule of holes? Ever heard of that? First rule of holes is when you're in a hole, stop digging, right? That's the first rule of holes. When you're in a hole, stop digging. So all of it comes down to this. If you're going to start hating it, then hate it. Stop all new debt. But you're like, Brian, this was the week. Some of you are like, are you kidding me? I was getting new appliances this week, and I didn't have anything saved. It was just going to be woohoo. I was going to finance that car. I was going to upgrade my car. I was going to upgrade my boat. I was going to upgrade my whatever toy it was. It's like it's literally this. First rule of holes, when you're in one, stop digging. And by the way, that represents a lot of Americans right now, upside down, right? Financially upside down. One of the most amazing stories I ever read. Listen to this. You tell me what the future of this young couple is if they don't make serious changes. Tiffany and Bo, he's 26, she's 25. He hated his job and he always wanted to be his own business person. And so he quit his job and he started his own painting business. Be a professional painter. So started his own business. He landed a huge job right away to paint an entire apartment complex. Okay, good money there. Make a lot of money doing this, right? But he didn't have any money for all the upfront expenses. So his mother-in-law gave him a $10,000 loan. How many of you would take a $10,000 loan from your mother-in-law to start a business? Doesn't seem like any high risk there. And on top of that, he didn't have money for the paint, so the paint company allowed him to run up a $13,000 tab on this job because it was a huge apartment complex. But then, one of the general contractors that he'd been working with before defaulted on a debt of $24,000 that was owed him. $24,000. And then all of a sudden the economy changed and work slowed down considerably and he wasn't getting any more painting jobs for his new painting business, so they were living only on his 25-year-old wife's income. Thankfully, she was an MRI technician. But she said, we really haven't been buying anything lately. And somebody told him about debt and what the issues were, and they made him sit down and make a list, and they'd never done this. And here's what they put on their list. On top of his business debts that he'd jacked up, the $10,000 to his mother-in-law, they had $13,000 in business debt to that paint store. They had $21,000 on their credit cards. $21,000. $52,000 in student loans. $42,000 on 3 car loans. There's only 2 drivers, and they have 3 cars, and they financed all 3 of them, $42,000. They were over $130,000 in debt, and good news, surprise, you have a child on the way. Do you think they were happy about the child being on the way in that context? Remember what we said about debt being so dangerous? The Bible says a prudent man sees evil and hides himself. The naive just keep on going, and they pay the penalty. It's like, don't be naive about finances. Don't be naive about debt. if you can stand in the road and see a truck coming towards you, should you A, stand in the middle of the road or keep walking toward the truck, or should you get out of the way? Right? That's what the Bible's saying. Get off the road. You need a new path, because the path you're on, is the path they're on good for them? Will they even make it to 30 financially without declaring bankruptcy at this rate? They have no shot. Because in case you don't know it, kids are expensive. And they don't have the money for it now. They've got to make changes or they're in big trouble. So the first thing is obey the first rule of holes. When you're in one, stop digging. So you cut up your credit cards, no more car loans, you pay cash, you say no to yourself. When I first in 2007 saw the state of my debt and how much debt I was in, and I'm like, oh my goodness. One of the changes we made was how we handle Christmas, because we do Christmas big. I'm not even going to tell you how much money we spend at Christmas. We do Christmas big. And all of a sudden it's like, I want to get out of this hole. And so for a couple of years, we did mini Christmases, because I hate debt, and I wanted to be out of debt. So that meant saying no to myself, saying no to my kids too as well, so that we could achieve this goal. The second thing was immediately start an emergency fund. Immediately start an emergency fund. And the goal is $1,000 in your emergency fund, and you don't touch it. New clothes are not an emergency. Right? A new stereo, a new TV at Walmart on sale for $268 for a 70-inch flat panel, 4K. You could get that today. That's not an emergency. It's not an emergency. Okay? You save it for emergencies only. Because if your brakes go out in your car, you're going to have an emergency. One of my sons really took this to heart when he was redoing his financial system, and he built an emergency fund right away, and right after that had a car emergency, and he called me and he said, Dad, so glad I had an emergency fund, because now I don't have a debt. Because I had the funds set aside just in case something came up. Now, how many of you think, and you don't have to respond to this in any way, but how many of you think that you are going to have a financial emergency sometime over the next rest of the year? Oh yeah, pretty guaranteed, right? If you go out into the parking lot, my car is a 2004 Pontiac Vibe. That's what I drive. I like my old car. I got nothing, don't have any, well, I'll drive that thing till it dies. But it's not out there today. It's not there. Where is it? Well, if you go into Dodgeville and Randy's Towing, it's right there. Right there, Randy's Towing. Because about a week ago, I was running some errands. I pulled into the Quick Trip in downtown Dodgeville, and I went inside to get something, came back out, turned the key over, and nothing. And I thought, oh, it's a dead battery. Ran to Walmart, pulled the battery, put a new battery in, right in the Quick Trip parking lot, got it all hooked up, turned it over, nothing. And it was holiday weekend, no tow trucks available. But my kids were there, 3 of them, so I called all my kids, and we pushed that car up and over the hill and down to Randy's Towing, because we had to get it out of the parking lot. And there it is sat now for 8 days, dead. And finally, they're so busy, finally got a chance to call me and say, yeah, it's a new starter, I'll have it back to you by Tuesday. And so it's going to be a $300 or $400 unplanned expense in my life. How many of you think I thought that day that I was going to spend $300 or $400 to repair my car? No, I didn't think about it. But I had to. Remember what I said? 2 things never tell you they're coming. Emergencies and opportunities. So an emergency fund prepares you for the emergencies you're going to face so that you don't have to go into debt. Proverbs 21:20, the wise store up choice food and olive oil. The idea is you don't spend all you get. You always are trying to save because you don't know what the future holds. So you're always going to be saving. Now, in order to really get serious about doing this one, you have to, I'm sorry, I'm going to use the B word in church today, I know. So you have to have a budget. So this is the key to the whole thing. You've got to have a budget. And I can't tell you how many times since 2007 I've had people go, budgets, I don't like them, I don't want to do it. People react very negatively to the word budget, but the reality is a budget is just a tool to tell every single dollar that you earn every month where it must go. That's all it is. It's a tool to tell your dollars where they need to go every single month. Because otherwise, if you don't have that tool, your dollars, I promise, will just go. every month. How many of you get to the end of the month and you're like, oh my goodness, I have so much cash left over, I don't know where to put it all. It's just like, I've got cash everywhere. I guess I'll save some money, right? Is that how your life is? Because it's not my life. And a budget's a tool to say, dollar, you're going here, and you're going here, and you're going here. That way, it goes where you need it to go. So if you flip your notes over, if you are a little bit reluctant about budgeting, on the back of your notes, I put all of these things. And so you can just put a check mark. We don't have time to read through these. You just put a check mark by any of those things that you want as a part of your future, because that's what a budget can do. Like control and track your money, prioritize your spending, prevent overspending and debt. I didn't put a check mark by all of them, but pretty much all of them. I want those things, and a budget is a means to get those. Now, really, really good news is if you go to that website, daveramsey.com, you can go to that website. If you're already bored and tired of listening to me, you can go there right now. Go to daveramsey.com. He has a free app called the Every Dollar app. You can download it on your phone. I put it on my phone this week and started working with it, and you can have a budget on your phone, and you can start to get control of your budgeting today. And he's got tons of free articles on that website, daveramsey.com, tons of free articles about how to do this well. So if you're not good at it, and you're like, I know I'm not good at it, start to get good at it, because if you're going to stop all new debt, start an emergency fund, you're talking about a budget. The third one is to implement a debt snowball if you're going to get out of debt. One of my favorite things that he came up with, a debt snowball. I don't know if he came up with it, but that he teaches on. And it's simple to understand. You list out all your debts, then you make the minimum payments and everything so you're not falling further behind, and then you start paying extra on the smallest debt. So if you owe $150 to whatever, you put everything you can into that. And once you've paid it off, you shift all of that money to the next smallest debt, and then the next smallest. And so pretty soon, after you started making progress and paying off some of these smaller debts, you don't shift it and buy something new for yourself, right? You shift all of that you were paying into the next debt. And pretty soon, just like when you were a kid, did you ever take a snowball and roll it down the hill? Well, it picks up more and more snow, right, as it goes down the hill. And that's the idea of a snowball, is that as you start paying off these little ones and just moving all of that money to the next debt, pretty soon you are making huge payments on your debt, and that's how you get debt-free. So you get debt-free by using a tool like this. And then my favorite thing to tell people, in case you haven't heard, is take Financial Peace University. And I promise you, the man who invented this, Dave Ramsey, doesn't know my name. I promise you. Do you know what percentage of money he pays me every month to talk about his stuff? None. I get nothing. It's the old saying, I'm just one beggar telling other beggars where he found bread. That's what it is. That's all it is. Because in 2007, I'll thank God forever for the day that kit arrived in my office. And I'll kid you not, I sat there looking at it, and I'm like, do I really need this? I mean, after all, it's me. I'm pretty financially savvy here. I'm not sure what I could learn, but you know what? Maybe there'd be something of value for somebody else. And so that's the mindset I had when I put the course together, put the group together for that first group in 2007. And we sat in someone's living room, and we put in the first CD and we started watching, or DVD, and we started watching, and we're like, and you're filling out in your workbook. And by the second week, I was overwhelmed, because one of the first things he has you do is make a list of all the debts you have. And I had no idea how awful our financial situation was. We had over $26,000 in consumer debt. Most of that was on a credit card. A bunch of it was on a home equity line of credit. And that doesn't count the fact that we had a $20,000 personal loan for remodeling our house from an agency of the government that was for low-income families. You never had to pay it back till you sold your house. So we really had and no interest on it. So we had $46,000 in debt, and that doesn't include the fact that we had refinanced our house about 4 times to wipe out our debt. So the real picture was a disaster. And I was arrogant. But I wasn't arrogant once we started this program, and we started sitting there. I'll tell you, the emotions of everyone in the room on week 2 was embarrassment, shame, and regret. I felt stupid because of all that I'd cost myself, because I wasn't handling money the way God wanted me to handle money. I was so dumb with money, and I didn't know I was dumb with money. And like I said, it took 2 years. 2 years of really hard work and saying no to ourselves over and over and over again to fill the hole back in. But I'll tell you, once you fill that hole back in, and you stand on top of that dirt and you throw your shovel away because you are not going back into, you're not digging holes anymore. When you're free from that, the experience that, you know what happens? All the money you were paying to all those companies for interest payments, your credit cards, all to the car loan, to the home equity line of credit, all that money is now yours. And you know what you do with it? Whatever you want. Because it's yours now, rather than giving it all to them. It's an amazing feeling. And doesn't it fit the feeling that God would want us to have of freedom? So a couple of things as we finish up today. I want you to really think about, do you feel any stress about your finances today? Some of you do, some of you don't. Some of you don't, by the way, and you should. Some of you are like me. I didn't feel any stress about it. I was having fun. I should have been stressed. I was stressed after I took the course. By the way, you can take the course today. You can go on daveramsey.com and sign up and get started. Do you even know how much debt you actually have? Some of you do, some of you don't. Some of you don't have any debt. Wonderful, wonderful. Are you actually budgeting and living on a budget? For some of you, that's going to be the big change. If you aren't, you can download the app today. You can get started today. I'll tell you, it's work to actually fill it out. I've been working on it this week. I'm not done. It's not like you're going to sit down in 5 minutes and have this all figured out. It's work to do a budget, but it's worth it because you've got to tell your money where to go or it's just going to go. And then you can, of course, sign up for the course. Now, we've talked about it as a church in the fall. We're going to offer courses again after the summer's over, so that if you're like, okay, I really want to do this with people, you're welcome. You can start right now and do it over the summer, or you can do it with a whole bunch of families in the fall, because we're going to do it again. Because I don't know about you, but I'm predicting, and I'm not a prophet, but I'm predicting that things financially are still going to be tough by the fall. I could be wrong. But I think that more and more families are going to need this. And when you're sitting in a living room, learning it together with other people who are also going, oh my goodness, it actually helps a little bit. Because everybody's in the same boat. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. You know, this subject is really important to us spiritually because, first off, God wants us to be good managers of what He's entrusted to us temporarily. Money is His, not ours. You don't believe me? Die and take everything with you that you can. And the reality is, you'll see right away, you don't own any of it. It's temporarily in your hands and mine. So that's why it's really important that we take this seriously. But the other side of this too is that we have a God who cancels debts. We have a God who cancels debts. We used that word earlier in the service, the word sinner, that this idea that we've all been unloving in our lives. And we have built a debt that we owe God that we could never, ever, ever repay. And our great God of love sent His Son, Jesus, into the world to pay for and cancel the debt of any human being who would turn to Jesus and ask. I mean, all of Christianity ultimately is this amazing offer from God of complete spiritual debt repayment. And it's not free. It's only free for us. Someone had to pay our debt, and Jesus paid it with His own life. Now, maybe you're sitting here today, and this is the first time it's really clicking this clearly in your life that Jesus is really important. We all need Him. Because we have all been unloving in our time on this world. All of us. And if you want Jesus to cancel your debt, you can just ask Him. You can say something like this in your heart to Him. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you in faith. And I'm asking you to please forgive me. Cancel the debt I've created by my unloving words and deeds. I need you. And I want you in my life today. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Now, as we finish up today, I always ask the same thing. Would you grab your card out of your program and just take a moment and fill it out? If you're a regular attender, just put your name down so we know that you were here, but maybe you asked Jesus to forgive you. Do you see this box right here? Just check the box. Let us know what you've done, or maybe you renewed your commitment to him today. Let us know. If you have something you want us to pray about, you can certainly let us know, and we have a team of people that will pray for you today, and then just drop it in one of the 2 offering boxes back on the back walls where you came in. All right, thanks so much for coming, and we hope to see you again next week.